Howdy y'all, this is AR Cavley, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do another not so short review, although it probably will be somewhat short, but I make no promises. And what I should probably rename my reviews are another out-of-date review because I'm usually a couple of years behind on, well, any game system I review. This time I'm going to review a game for Savage Worlds. It uses a Savage Worlds rule set. I'm relatively new to the Savage Worlds rule set. When I first became interested in it, I saw it had a lot of good things in it that I liked. It had a lot of subsystems and rule sets that I thought were pretty cool. And I have a soft spot in my heart for universal game systems because I like the idea of just having to know one rule set, even though it may not be perfect for everything. So I got this right about the time that the new Adventures Edition, I guess, started coming out, and I didn't even know about it. I just saw that handy little book on Amazon for $10 and said, that's a great deal. And then I saw Savage Sword of Solomon Kane, and I said, that is awesome. I need to get it. So I got that, and I now have a handful of different setting books, Interface Zero, Nova Praxis, the Lankmar, how do you say that? With Fofford and the Grey Mouser. Because there are so many excellent systems. But there are always a couple of things about Savage Worlds that made me hesitant to embrace it wholly because I'm a rules wonk, and I'm one of those guys who's always has to fiddle with the rules or look for the perfect rule set, which of course there aren't any, and I understand that. But two things that Savage Worlds uses, and other games I like use, that are not necessarily my favorite. One, I'm not the biggest fan of meta currency. So that kind of held me back the bennies, even though they're fairly limited in use. So that's okay. I'm not the biggest fan of using them for, hey, I'm going to spend this meta currency and make the watch captain my brother, things that just kind of arbitrarily change the story. And the bennies, at least in this edition, are fairly limited, and they're fun. And the other thing are the edges and hindrances. I have a lot of games that I've liked over the years that had those kind of things, whether they're advantages and disadvantages or feats or edges, whatever. As the forever GM, when I look up an NPC and I see seven edges and hindrances, or like Forbidden Lands, another game I love, same thing. Except that you have a bunch of those traits, and you have different levels. And so I look at these things, I don't remember what these things are. So. And it's not something that can't be overcome, obviously, but just as that gut wrench, those are two things that really kept me from fully embracing, wanting to get involved in Savage Worlds, despite all the awesome setting books that they have, and what do they call the Savage campaigns or Savage Point campaigns, whatever. So. All that to say, Savage Worlds has turned into one of those games for me where when I just read it, just theorizing about it, it has things about it I don't like. But having played it, not a lot, but having played it, it's really fun to play. So, and there are games that are like that, and since I'm, one of those gaming navel gazers, it happens sometimes that you read a game and it just doesn't sound great, but then you actually give it a chance and you play it, and it just works. It's great. And so I've really come to enjoy Savage Worlds, and I have spent money on a bunch of different setting books now. And today we're going to go over one of those. And again, it's been out for a while, but that is Seven Worlds. It describes itself as a hard-ish sci-fi soap opera. And having read through this and the very sizable campaign book, it does fulfill that. A couple of just upfront things. As I've read this now, it kind of to me anyway seems like a kind of a mix between Babylon 5 and The Expanse, because it's not as scientifically rigorous as The Expanse, but there's enough in there that anybody who appreciates those aspects of hard sci-fi games are there. And I'll go through the book and kind of cover the things that I really liked about this setting. Overall, it really is designed to be used with the campaign book. I'm not going to go through the campaign book, just not to give anything away, basically. But it is it's maybe a little more linear than other Savage World campaign books. I don't know that I'd go so far as to say railroady, but it is an epic, adventure arc, and it is epic. So much so that I generally tend to prefer smaller scale things, right? You're working for your colony or your company. This is an epic campaign that everything hangs in the balance kind of thing. Lord of the Rings kind of level epic, but it's science fiction. It's very well done, and it has a lot of information, and it has each section, and this will be about as much as I talk about the campaign book. Each section not only has the scenes for that part of the campaign, it also has a handful of one-shot adventures, things that you can do kind of in between. That being said, you don't even really need the campaign setting, because there's a lot of information just in the setting book. You can turn it into any kind of campaign. You can make a small campaign, because there are enough factions in there, and there's enough space in there, I mean literally and figuratively, that you can do all sorts of types of missions there. So let's go ahead and head on over and take a look at that. All right, everyone, here is the hardcover version. I believe it does come in a softcover version as well. Has some pretty cool art on the front there by IntelliStories. Savage Worlds licensed product. I see this stuff on the front. It kind of reminds me of the Fallout jumpsuits there. All right, the inner cover and the back cover. This is kind of the lower detail kind of player version. This one has other stuff added in. One of the first things that becomes apparent is that even though some of the decisions made in the setting kind of would go a little bit farther beyond what I would prefer in something calling itself a hard sci-fi game, it's apparent that the writers of this had a very keen eye towards the science of things in the setting. One particular thing that's pretty cool just to start off with, this little picture here shows the relative sizes of the planets, and then over on the left, this is the relative distance. Well, it's full of these little bars of, throughout the book, little scientific bars explaining scientific facts and explaining sometimes their decisions, but they're very cool. They're very informative, and I'm a science type guy. I like seeing those just because they're very interesting. So you take this and you scrunch it down here, and this section right here represents the size. I guess well, it wouldn't even be the whole solar system, not even the radius, because it's not going to the sun. It's not going to the middle of the sun, but basically the radius of the solar system right here. And you follow this blue line, and this blue line is actually more than just layout or whatever. It's a map. This to answer this question: how far away is the closest star to the sun? Here we see there it brings out the Oort cloud, the start of the Oort cloud, and you can follow this all the way through. And of course, you see just how empty space really is. But if you follow this blue line through the book, and I didn't bookmark them or anything, but you'll find light year markers, tell you 1 light year, 2 light year, whatever. And then all the way at the very end, we see Proxima Centauri. So I thought that was just kind of a neat little thing to start the book off with. And that like I said, it kind of sets the tone for the respect for the hard science type stuff. All right, and right here it describes what makes it special. It's space opera with hard sci-fi, and it does a good job of explaining something that can be some things that can be complicated scientific concepts fairly simply. And I'll add that this book, or the authors at least, cite and are familiar with Project Rho, otherwise known as atomic rockets, which is a site that is it's dedicated to talking about the science, rocket science essentially, in science fiction, games, and books. And I was a supporter of atomic rockets for a long time, and I used it extensively when, let me plug myself, when writing my own science fiction novels. Did you know that I had written science fiction novels? Now you do. I will, and they are kind of the same bent. Hard sci-fi with a couple of hand-wavium things in there. And I'll leave links to those like I don't know, do I usually? I'll have to go back and check. But anyway, plug over. But Project Rho has a lot of good discussions about how rockets would look, how space flight, would be. And whenever you're dealing with hard sci-fi in a lot of things would be very boring, like space battles and things like that. They would not be that exciting just because of the mechanics of them. And so it's okay, especially for fiction and gaming, to add some elements that aren't strictly hard sci-fi, aren't strictly realistic. I like to use the word verisimilitudinous, which I don't know is actually a word, but a form of verisimilitude, but I like using it. Anyway, a discussion of the background setting, how to make your characters a type of characters, a quick list of important facts, and generally speaking, without giving too much away, there are jump points for I think they call them something else, but there's jump points, psionics, shields, energy shields, which are kind of the big three sci-fi, hand waviums, or um, elements that you wouldn't normally associate with hard sci-fi, with true hard sci-fi. And basically, it centers around a couple of large organizations, the Circle, EarthGov, and planets that were made available by aliens who gave us jump port coordinates. We figured out, supposedly, how to do that, but finding the jump points was something that was very, very difficult. And really, part of the background is that Earth could not go anywhere, could not really get far. They found one. Actually, this guy found one a long time ago, and the mysterious girlfriend released his journals. But until the introduction of this alien species, the alien species had been released them to humanity. So humanity knew how to do it, but didn't really know how to find, and still doesn't really know how to find jump points. So they are reliant on the aliens, basically. The art in the book is pretty good. It's kind of this. I'm not sure it's not really cartoony, but it is this this colored illustration. I guess maybe the right thing, and it has some very like kind of a Elon Musk kind of character, and the first psionic. Here's one of those boxes that talks about the science of things, and it is upfront and honest when it's talking about the things, the setting that the thing, when things are expanded beyond, or if they're they've taken license with for the sake of the game, which is not too bad. Discussions about all this stuff, some timelines, and I'm not obviously just going to go through and read all the timelines. Interspersed with it throughout the book are four main main pre-generated PCs that are, you don't have to play them through the campaign, but they're there for people who want to use them. One of the interesting things about this is that the sphere is the most efficient shape for the setting. And that just has to do with the amount of volume that the sphere holds compared to other shapes. And it is possible because of the shields that they have that shield the crew from the basically nuclear thrusters that they have. Otherwise, they would have to have the like we're more used to seeing the engine at the far end of the ship, maybe on a gantry kind of setup, like that, where because radiation exposure, of course, it goes down. Is it exponentially? I think it goes exponentially with distance. So instead of having the engine, the radioactive engine on a gantry or at a farther part down the hull to separate it from the crew, they have these Colburn shields that they use for a couple of different things throughout the game. So I like that. I like that idea. I like the round ships. I think that's pretty cool. Although I'll admit I prefer the longer gantry aesthetic. Makes it look more aerospacey to me, but it's still pretty cool. One of the technological advances are this room temperature superconductors, and so they make use of a lot of magnetics, which they have some pretty cool applications for. And that's one of the things when some settings, when they make some kind of super science, they only explore one or two outcomes of that. But how many things today are, unintended consequences of some breakthrough in, internet or telephony or, cell phones, whatever. And, so sometimes if you get too far out there with the tech, you can start punching holes in your own plot, so to speak. One of the things that I thought was very cool is instead of just having the magnetic boots and walking around the ship, they actually use these magnetic fields to zip people up and down the hallways, and that's pretty slick. So you don't have to, of course, if you lose power or whatever, then you're in full zero G. Because there's no one thing I'm glad of. There's no artificial gravity. That's probably one of the things that I really. It's the one thing I like the least added to my sci-fi. I just think zero gravity is cool, and it makes for a very interesting campaign element. And so, of course, thinking that way, I'm like, oh, that's cool. They could use that to zip around, but then they could use that if they have boarding actions to capture people, slam them up and down into the bulkheads or whatever. And that is actually discussed later on. So there's discussions of gravity effects. Of course, there's no teleporters. Everything. These spheres are not designed to enter the atmosphere. So there's surface to orbit shuttles. One thing that I'm very impressed with that I think is a cool aspect to add to a game is heat, because if you've ever studied like the thermodynamics of space travel and space combat, which are there's a lot of articles on that Project Rho page, and I'll leave a link to it. It becomes very interesting because heat in space, it has to radiate, which is slow. It doesn't convect. There's no air or water, no fluid around the ship to take that away. Convection, no convection medium, so it all has to radiate, and that's very slow. And even just working on typical life support and engines heats those things up. So it talks about dissipating heat, and it adds, we'll get to that later, it adds heat rules into the setting spaceship combat stuff. All right. Again, we're talking about superconductors. The circle is one of the big, is the main kind of setting. It's the NGO that the PCs are ostensibly going to be part of, but you could really, there's enough information. You wouldn't have to make them part of the circle. They could work for anything. They could work for EarthGov. Earth gets pounded, and so it becomes it has to be evacuated. And so some of the other life, there's only a handful of life-bearing planets that they find, and some of them, because they had to evacuate Earth, which still survived, but they did evacuate. And so a lot of people went to these other planets, and these other planets have become powerful political entities. Discussions of, aliens, Arthur C. Clarke's views, and Fermi's paradox, all that kind of stuff. Some good write-ups on the planets, the governments. Space elevators. All right. And each one of these planets has its own write-up. And one of the cool things that they did, and maybe I'll show some, is they made each of these planets, they made them in Google Earth so that you can pull them up in the Google Earth app and get a 3D look at them and of the space map, the different jump points. Discussion of the Outer Space Treaty and each of the planets. All right, a little discussion of how the psionics came about. Now again, psionics is, I kind of rate that up there with one of those things that I'm not really one of my favorite things to add to a hard sci-fi, but I love Babylon 5, and so who am I to complain? Anyway, all the way through, it's color, it's well made. This is I think I got this off of, I think I got this one off of eBay. Discussion of the habitable planets, some more artwork. And this section talks about the day in the life of the V world, which is the augmented reality. There are no true AIs, but every character has what's called an assistant, which is actually something that they had something similar in Transhuman Space back then. It wasn't a true AI or anything, but your assistant in this does basically your administrative stuff. It's like your smartphone, but it's built into your lenses, which are either glasses or actual lenses and a few maybe subcutaneous things, which I like that too because I love cyberpunk as a genre. I have a lot of fun playing cyberpunk. I love it. But the idea that everyone's going to plug things into their brain that someone remotely can hack into, that just always kind of bothers me because maybe I'm a Luddite, but no, sir, I'm not going to plug in my brain into your corporate cell phone network. Oh, yes, I'm sure your security is the tightest in the universe. But here's a good discussion of stealth in space and how that's not a thing. Okay, here's one of those marks, 2 light years. Oops, 2 light years right there. And here's a discussion of the shields and how things work in space. A list of new edges and hindrances, which is another thing that I find problematic because a lot of settings, they just throw a ton of edges and hindrances, just such bloat. This one has a few that I don't think really are needed, but some of them are setting specific and not like I like the 0G because operating 0G is a lot different. So these ones are not too much over the line. And then here's the advancements and getting into the gear. The gear is kind of the normal stuff. It's being hard sci-fi. Everything is, lasers have their limitations as far as hand weapons, but are the main weapon on main shipboard weapon. Talking about space travel, the jump is instantaneous, but there's always, then you go to your regular kind of rocket travel from the jump points to the various planets. Some critical hit tables for the vehicles. This one is brought in line for the ships. Like here's your magnetic grid. Like other space rules in Savage Worlds, this uses basic chase rules to simulate the battle between ships or whatever, and you just set up a distance between the two because it really is it's a truism that when you're just talking about two ships in a 3D space, unless you get to the point where you're having to worry about firing arcs and things like that, all of Starfleet battles, it's really a one-dimensional battle. It's 2 points, you're 2 ends of a line, and it's the range. And that is expressed pretty well in here, and the maneuvers and options for having space battles, they make sense, and they do a good job of representing that kind of aspect of space battle and the different ranges without making things super complex. It does add a heat mechanic, so it adds you can see right here, the different weapons have heat scores, and those heat scores come into play. So you may have a decision to where you don't, maybe you're afraid of not being able to dissipate that heat because it has very serious consequences, like shutting your ship down. um, there's a when the heat when the heat overloads the ship, one of the functions of this shield is that it can also act as a heat sink. So you have your internal heat sinks and you have physical radiators, and then you have this cold-borne shield, which can also absorb the heat. When the heat is too much for the ship systems, everything shuts down. So you either shut down or you melt or you explode, and that's kind of like raising the white flag. You know, you're not gonna if you fight anymore, you're going to destroy your own ship. So that becomes an interesting aspect to spaceship combat that's added in there. And I will say that in the campaign book, there are space battles that might be beyond some players, just as far as grasping the tactics. You know, if you're not really like a war gamer. Now, you don't really have to be, but I can see some people might have an issue with the uh, maybe with the added complexity. But like I say, it's not really what I would call added complexity, but there is another layer on there because of the heat dynamics that get added. But it is mostly the same vehicle combat system, the chase system, out of the main rules. Then here we have some encounter tables talking about all of your, the types of ships and whatnot. Here's some game mastering advice, which is good. One thing that I've always found when gaming when GMing a complex setting is to really resist that urge to info dump, especially if you're kind of like a techie gearhead type person. You want to go in it like myself. I want to go in and explain how the shields work and how the heat transfer and all that stuff. But not everyone, well, most people are not interested in that level of detail. So there's no need to necessarily throw that in there. They just need to know they have a shield. And if they ask, you can put little dribble drops here and there, or as things come up in the campaign, you can, that's when you explain about how heat works, right? You don't start off with this big info dump. But good discussion. Typical GM in advice on how to deal with things there. And then here is a scenario at the back of the book, and then it has its bestiary with the various NPC types and the types of alien monsters from different planets, and then the stats for the vehicles, spaceships, things like that. This mysterious encounter, it actually acts as the intro adventure for the campaign book as well. So you can play it separately as a one shot. It talks about playing it at like as a convention play or whatever. But it also works. It also has a place as the first adventure in the overall big epic campaign. All right, so we see we have a lot of good ships in here. A pretty good variety of ships to work with. So a lot of good information. All right, here's a cool little layout of the players, or the default player ship. Right. Here's I like this little gumball Russian stacking doll picture of how the different spheres fit together. one of the and I meant to touch on this back talking about the spaceship weapons, but or about the magnetics. One of the things with the magnetics, and part of the reason why the firing arcs don't really play into this combat system is the weapon arrays. They're all set on that magnetic grid, so you can position them all over the ship. If you need to reconfigure them, whatever. If so you don't have to worry about turning arcs or anything like that. If you want to, if there's someone off to your right, you just move. You just have all the weapons slide over so that they're facing that direction, and that's also how their what they call the G gem works. It just goes around like a centripetal force on the outside, the pseudo gravity, if you will. But and this is also a pretty good way to see what all the larger ships and stuff look like, because they all are basically spherical with the engines in the center. And finally, well, I won't say finally because I do plan on. I'll here in just a minute. I'll show some of the 3D stuff just because it is pretty neat. Here's the facts and info for hard sci-fi gamers, and this is where it goes into. I don't want to say mea culpa, but this this is where they go in and say, yeah, we know that shields don't work, and we know that this or that, but this is why we decided to. So kind of a good discussion. On an unrelated note, one of the things that I was researching for my books is they do actually have, I think it was the ESA that have a project that basically is a magnetic shield designed to stop cosmic radiation more than anything else. It's been a while since I looked at it, but I thought it was just kind of cool. It's not going to stop laser beams and missiles and stuff, but I thought it was kind of cool that they actually do have those kind of things out there. I think it was at a working model stage too. And then here are a great list of references of different, yeah, just everything. Space. Here's some of them. A lot of them are links to Wikipedia, and different news articles that talk about those things. You'll see a lot of them are they point to articles on the Project Rho page. Scale of the universe, interstellar travel. So just a wealth of different articles about, well, really hard sci-fi stuff. So this is I haven't even gone through all of these. I've hit some of them. A lot of these are pretty interesting. I actually had to look up what a rotovator was. And I'm going to make you look it up too. But anyway, a bunch of great resources. Even if you don't even play the game, this thing has a lot of great resources. And it has a good index too. That's with as many topics in here. That's always good to have as a good index. And then there we are at Proxima Centauri, and the thank you to the backers. 7 worlds, sheets, character sheets, all that stuff. And some more art. This is the wraparound that's on the cover. And 7worldsrpg.com, and I'll put that in the notes too. But there's our vault dwellers. And even their pistols kind of look like the little default 10mm pistol you start with in Fallout. Still, it's a good picture though. I still like it. All right, so that's the book. And now we're going to go take a look at the 3D stuff. Just because it's kind of cool. All right, so here is the 3D map. And the 3D map includes stars that aren't on the 2D map. It's like everything within, oh gosh, I can't remember. 50 light years. You see Sol back there in the background. It's got all sorts of stuff. That's a free download. I think it just opens up in your it just opens a file up here, and you can zoom all around and get a good 3D version or a good 3D look. You can do a fit, see everything that's going on there. You can look at all these stuff, and it is just a 3D representation of the stars, but you can see here all the little jump paths. In some cases, when you look at the 2D map, it just looks like a couple of straight lines, but here you can see that they actually, jig and jog and change X and Y, all that stuff. Now let's take a look at Google Earth. Now this is the Earth for the game. This Pedernales, that is where the space tether is, the space elevator. This is the embassy ship of the aliens. You see I've got this whole thing a little turned upside down. And this is where the crater hit, or the comet hit that caused a lot of worldwide devastation and lots of death. And this is Concordia. This is one of the major planets of political import. All right. Well, apparently I have a little. I just put that over Earth, so it looks like it has some of the Earth on it too. Let's see. Oh, okay, here we go. Let's undo Earth. There we go. So you can just kind of look around, and obviously it's it's a skin put over the Earth. There is one of the settlements. And you can go from orbit and just take a look. It's just a cool little ad, and this game has a lot of those in the production. And I won't go through all the planets because my navigation of this has been been a little clunky, but they have one for all the major planets that have human colonies on them. So you can, if you have devices or something, if you're playing in certain virtual tabletops, then you could kind of show this to your players. Millicent, that's the capital. But all that to say, this a lot of, like I said, a lot of extras that this producer, this product, IntelliStories, have added to the game. Like I said, the campaign is pretty packed. There's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of things for adventurers to do. All right, that's my review of Seven Worlds. I hope it was helpful to you. I think it'll be a great addition to my Savage Worlds books, and a good campaign. Anyway, I'll put all the links and stuff down in the bottom, and happy gaming.